Okay, thank you for tuning in to this Tuesday, April the 26th on Organic News here on Awake Radio. My name is Catherine April Waters. Cat Waters on Facebook, April Waters on YouTube. I write articles for Hot Indie News and Democracy Chronicles, and alternative media always needs support and funding. That's like the biggest challenge that I was just speaking with Robert Scheer about, editor-in-chief at Truthdig, and your latest book is called They Know Everything About You, How Data Collecting Corps and Snooping Government Agencies Are Destroying Democracy. Thank you for joining me, Robert Scheer.
Hi, Scheer. Let me just say, by the way, my previous book is also pertinent.
Robert?
Serve Wall Street and rob Main Street. And I think that's really very much germane to this election issue. I was disappointed that people in New York picked Hillary Clinton because I think she's, pure and simple, carrying water for Wall Street, and how they could be so dumb back in my own native city, I don't quite understand. But maybe it's because independents weren't able to vote, and maybe also because you had the old Tammany Hall practices of controlling the voting. I don't know. I wasn't there, but I was really quite shocked. I mean, the Clintons have been absolutely a disaster in terms of income inequality. They're the ones that carried the basic deregulation legislation for Wall Street. Her husband did. She backed him. And I'm amazed that she was able to convince even working people and minorities, to go for it. I don't know what they're thinking.
And you were recently on Democracy Now! Having a debate with Tori Osborne. She's backing Hillary Clinton, and she kept saying to you, to stop looking in the past. This is not the 90s, and Hillary is not responsible for the actions of her husband. Do you believe that she can change her spots?
Well, first of all, if Hillary is not responsible for her actions of her husband, why is she campaigning based on his program? She's defended all of the things he did.
Right.
She's not for bringing back Glass-Steagall, which prevented the merger of investment and consumer banks. She blames Bernie Sanders for the Commodity Futures Modernization Act, which prevented the regulation of derivatives of collateralized debt obligations and credit defaults. That was her husband's bill. That was not Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders voted for omnibus legislation that would have, brought the economy to a halt. But it was her husband in cahoots with the Republicans, Phil Gramm in the Senate and others, was pushing that bill. And he was a lame duck president. He signed off after the 2000 election. And, she knows he did that. And he has defended it. She defended it. So this is garbage. She knows exactly what happens. She's turned to the very same people for advice that gave us that. John Podesta, her campaign manager, was up to his eyeballs in that. He was a lobbyist for big corporations and for Wall Street. She was close to Robert Rubin and Lawrence Summers and all those people who brought about the financial deregulation. So on 2 points that you've raised, one, it's not ancient history. It happens to be the thing that messed up the economy and continues to mess up the economy. And secondly, if she is as opposed to her husband's policies and would denounce them, I'd back her in a New York minute. All it would take for Hillary Clinton to get my support is for her to go on and say, my husband's administration screwed up big time, and we got to learn the lessons and now go the way that people like Elizabeth Warren and Brooksley Born have been saying.
Brooksley Born. Now, there's a woman that I would definitely vote for. That woman should be the president, should run for president.
Born, who was the one, clear voice that spoke out against all this financial deregulation, knew Hillary Clinton, by the way. They've both been in the Lawyers Guild together. Brooksley Born was the first woman editor of the Stanford Law Review. She's a great feminist, a great role model for women. And Hillary Clinton's husband threw her under the bus. You know, when Alan Greenspan and Robert Rubin and Lawrence Summers and these people ganged up on her, you know, Bill Clinton didn't defend her. He cut her loose. And the Commodity Futures Modernization Act that I was referring to was the anti-Brooksley Born bill. She was trying to do some regulation. She was head of a government body that was supposed to be regulating the trading of commodities, you know, including these mortgage-backed collateralized debt obligations. And the only reason they passed that law was to silence her, to prevent her from doing it. And they said that in testimony. You know, there's no question about it. So Hillary Clinton, who claims to be a great proponent of women leadership, you know, she was silent when her husband undermined Brooksley Born. You know, who has been the victims of their policies, by the way? They've been primarily women, working women. You can go back to Clinton's whole record. That's what I was saying on Democracy Now!, the so-called welfare reform, which destroyed the federal program to aid women with dependent children. You know, then they go on to every single piece of global trade agreements. And then you get into the housing meltdown. The people, that's why I can't understand the voting pattern. It's absolutely bizarre. Because if you look at the Federal Reserve's own study, black people lost 70%, black college graduates lost 70% of their wealth. Brown college graduates lost almost the same amount. They were the hardest hit group. And it's only because it's been lied about and camouflaged and sold as somehow it didn't have to do with them. It all had to do with George W. Bush, which is utter nonsense. The financial deregulation was done under Bill Clinton. And when people say they don't want to go back to the 90s, they don't want to go back to the Clinton record. That's what they're saying. They're saying that's ancient history. No, you can't take credit for the great boom, the tech boom of the Clinton years, which Hillary does, and not talk about the financial deregulation, which was the main, legacy of the Clinton years. How dare you distort history the way she has? I mean, it's astounding. It's the big lie technique.
If Hillary did, say what you just said and admitted, my husband screwed up or something, like, you never hear that. So when I hear people like Tori Osborne say, this is not the 90s, don't hold it against people like what happened in the past, but you don't hear people learning from anything that they did in the past. So, as far as I'm concerned, yeah, I mean, it still is kind of the 90s or even worse than the 90s.
No, but it's even more. Look, we're in agreement here. What I'm trying to say is the contradiction is even more outrageous because Hillary Clinton is running on her husband's record. Okay, that's her whole campaign on the domestic on the economy. We want to bring back the good times of Bill Clinton. Oh. Well, you can't run on the good times of Bill Clinton and on the 90s without talking about the legacy of Clinton, which is radical financial deregulation, destroying the rules of the road put in place by Franklin Delano Roosevelt to prevent another depression, right? That's what we're talking about here. So you can't have it both ways. You can't say, my husband did all these great things and I want to do more of the same without talking about the destructive deregulation that your husband put in place. Right. It's utter nonsense.
And she doesn't acknowledge any of that.
No, she doesn't acknowledge any of it. And it's amazing that the media doesn't hold her accountable. The media has just been awful, including Paul Krugman of the New York Times. It's just been awful on this.
Yeah, that's why I try. I do this, and it's it's hard. It's hard. Doing alternative media is extremely difficult. Getting people to accept information that they don't get from the mainstream. But you also brought up, which I was really...
They're getting it. And by the way, I think California is going to be a more progressive state on this. I wouldn't be surprised if Bernie really shocks people, does very well here in California, where I happen to be. And I'm glad I left New York many years ago. Yeah. I'm only kidding, of course, but I did leave New York, and I am in California. I have a feeling that in the June primary here, Bernie Sanders is going to surprise people. I may be wrong. Money, Clintons have a lot of money. They have a lot of connections. They have a lot of media influence. They're very powerful. They're the most powerful political machine in America, and they can reward a lot of people. They can make life good for a lot of people, help their careers, put money into their operations, even tax deductible money, through their foundation. So there's a lot of co-option going on, no question about it.
So, being that you mentioned the election, because, we had a primary election here, April the 19th, and something like 200,000 votes got purged. I mean, they couldn't find their votes, like all kinds of, people are suing. There's actually a lawsuit. And, I can't understand why the election, it should be voided and done over.
Well, it's not going to happen. But, one thing I'd like to raise with you, because I think the real test for people like us is going to be, what do you do if Bernie doesn't get it? Right now, I want to keep up the pressure that people, should take a close look at. I think Bernie's run an incredible campaign. Frankly, I'm amazed that a guy from Brooklyn could do this well, but, being from the Bronx myself. But, I'm really impressed. I thought he would get 5% of the vote or something, and I'm stunned by how well he's been able to educate the American public and raise issues. So I give him a lot of credit.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, if he doesn't make it and he backs Hillary, should people just fall in line, or should they look at a third party candidate like Jill Stein?
Right.
I think that's going to be a really important issue. And then people are going to say, "Oh, you're just doing what Ralph Nader did." Well, I like following Ralph Nader's example. He's one of the most impressive human beings this country has produced.
Amen.
And so, I think one could make a good argument that if Hillary Clinton doesn't change her ways, we haven't even talked about foreign policy. And the New York Times, they try to make her look in that magazine piece just Sunday, Hillary the Hawk, as if she's a tough pragmatist. God, she's a warmonger.
Yeah.
She's worse than Margaret Thatcher.
I mean, she should literally be, she should be in jail, arrested under war crimes.
Well, now you go a little further than I would. I certainly would like to have her be held accountable for her decisions and for her policies. Yeah. And if you have evidence of war crimes, then they should come up in a trial. Which ones were you thinking about particularly?
I'm not sure, not the ones about Benghazi or anything, but just Iraq and the whole weapons of mass destruction.
Well, but she didn't do the basic lying. That was George W. Bush. I think we could stick to what she just should be held accountable. Right. Is that she believes in regime change. She believes in invading other countries under false pretenses. She extended this policy over Obama's objection. She pushed him quite hard, if you believe that New York Times article, and I think it's well documented in that regard. She was much more aggressive than he wanted to be in going into Libya and Syria. That whole region is now more destabilized than it's ever been. Right. And it's more hospitable to terrorism than it's ever been. Right. And I think Hillary Clinton deserves a lot of the blame for that.
Can we talk, because you don't have a lot of time left, really quickly, you said you were in L.A. when the mayor smashed Occupy Wall Street, and the same thing basically happened in New York.
If you had told me you watched that program so carefully, I would have made more time. But also, if you would read my book, The Great American Stick-Up, I'll come back and talk to you anytime, because I lay out the whole economic argument there. And if you can't afford it, I'll send you copies. Your address. But seriously, I don't mind. It happens. This is a rough day for me because I teach in a couple hours. But I would urge you, to read my Great American Stick-Up, because I worked a long time on it. Yeah. I covered radical deregulation. I was a reporter originally at the Los Angeles Times. Then I was a columnist there. I followed that stuff in the 90s very carefully. And in my book, I make, I think, a compelling case for why the Clintons really deserve a lot of the blame for the state of our economy.
Right.
A lot. And on foreign policy, I think Hillary has been, I think her husband was, kind of like I actually at one point said he was like an Eisenhower figure, kind of right of center Republican. But I think Hillary is worse on foreign policy than Bill Clinton. And that's what my most recent book, The Great American Stick-Up, has a lot of stuff on that. I think she and Obama have been terrible on whistleblowers, terrible on, implying that Snowden is a traitor,
right.
Chelsea Manning being in jail, the Julian Assange being treated as a criminal. I mean, they've turned on the Constitution. They've turned on the First and Fourth Amendment. They've turned on, really great heroes of our time. John Kiriakou, who spent over 2.5 years in jail.
Jeffrey Sterling now too.
Yeah. So I think there's a lot to talk about.
Yeah.
I don't want to cut you off. And if you want to get back, I'll do it again.
Okay. That I know you don't have a lot of time, but I appreciate it. So I just want to thank you, Robert Scheer.
You got any one question that I didn't answer? I mean, I'll take a little more time.
I was going to just refer to your, to the most recent book on, they know everything about us, and and yet we know nothing about them. Everything with them is classified.
Yeah, well, that's what ticks me off about Hillary Clinton and the emails. The fact of the matter is, she knew enough about how the system works that she wanted to keep her emails free from government observation. But she thinks that the government that she was part of had the right to read our emails.
Right.
And she was never going to tell us about it until Edward Snowden did. And then she dares to imply that Snowden is some kind of a traitor. And then she lies about him. She says, what is he doing in Russia? She knows what he's in Russia. She yanked his passport. They did. The State Department she had been associated with before yanked his passport. She knows he's in Russia not out of choice. He was in transit. So now she's going to red bait him. Somehow it's like the old Soviet Union. And her cynical attitude towards whistleblowers, her contempt. Yeah. She said that, he had avenues if he wanted. There were no avenues. Right. What is she talking about? Right. He was working for a private contractor.
I think it was Tom Drake that actually did go through the chain of command and got nowhere. I mean, he's lucky he didn't get to go to jail, but he was almost...
Well, he had a plea bargain, though, and he had to go bankrupt, and he had to lose his job and his benefits. The same, John Kiriakou, the same thing. He had to accept the plea because they brought the whole power of the Justice Department, and this, great Eric Holder, who's campaigning for Hillary now, he was Attorney General who put these people in jail, and we don't hear a word about it. It's like not discussed, know. The people at The Nation magazine, for instance, Joan Walsh and others, Eric Foner, they all think, oh, this guy's great, and he's campaigning for Hillary, and that's wonderful. What about his record in smashing dissent, attacking whistleblowers, using the Espionage Act more than all other previous presidents combined?
It's clear, right? I mean, this is not complicated. It's very, very clear, whose side they're on. I mean, they're making people exercising their rights is now a crime.
Yes. And so why are people overlooking this now?
I mean, this is very, very serious. I mean, it's like our, liberties, our health, just in general, I just say it's like our health is like, just being completely eroded. We're being stripped of what is rightfully ours to keep feeding the monsters at the top.
Well, but the real problem is, that the people, it's always going to be the lesser evil argument. And Jerry Brown, when he was running against Bill Clinton way back when, actually coined the phrase in 92. He said, it was 92, that there's a problem of the evil of two lessers.
Right.
And one of the things that, really should be thought about is if a Republican, had won instead of Obama, and I voted for Obama, I supported Obama, and truth be told, I even contributed money to Obama. I thought, well, it is time to have a non-white president. Yes, it's long overdue, and he seemed like he at least cared about the Constitution and had some good values. And I've been very disappointed. But, now I look at this race and I think, if a Republican had won, we'd have a massive opposition on the economic issues. After all, Obama did basically what George W. Bush did. He bailed out the banks and got nothing in return. There was no concession. No one went to jail.
Right.
The homeowners were not helped. It was a total betrayal of what was promised. And the same thing on foreign policy. We get this. Who are the people they go after? They're the people who try to tell us the truth.
Right.
I mean, it's just astounding.
I mean, it kind of goes to show you, though, how tipped the scale, has gotten, to the point that, right, I mean, when the people really getting the shaft are finally rising up, they're looked at as the criminal and they're crushed.
Right. And as you mentioned, Occupy, that was a real moment of truth to me, because if you look in every single city where Occupy got crushed, I don't care whether it was Santa Fe, New Mexico, whether it was L.A., whether it was Oakland, with the only exception being Bloomberg and New York, they were all Democratic mayors. Every one of those places. Right. And they crushed this movement, which was where people were exercising their right of the people to peacefully assemble for a redress of grievances.
Even a lot of the public would just go by and completely, look down upon, these people making, real issues, bringing them to light. And a lot of people do seem to have the mentality that there are just certain pockets of the population that should be discarded. It's, that seems to be the attitude of people, like just walking by and saying, oh, just get a job. That was a lot of what you heard by passersby.
Yeah, well, I my feeling is if you look at the statistics, it's a majority of Americans.
How many jobs should people get? 3, 4, 5?
Yeah, well, that's the problem. And the fact of the matter is, the only reason they got upset by Occupy is because it was in a place where they were visible. Here in Los Angeles, we have a huge area of homeless people living in the most abysmal conditions in cardboard huts and tents. I mean, it's awful, awful. But they've been moved. And, for a temporary moment, there was some inconvenience near City Hall. There was some unsightliness near City Hall. And so that's why they brought the police in and cracked down. But, 5 blocks away from where Occupy was, there's people now in, a huge area living in horrible conditions. Nobody cares because it's out of sight, out of mind,
right.
And I want to tell you one person you might want to follow, because I happened very close to the end of the Occupy in L.A. I went and spoke, and Robert Reich, who had been Labor Secretary in Bill Clinton's administration, spoke. And he had been a close college friend of Hillary and Bill Clinton. And he was in the Clinton administration. And he's now supporting Bernie Sanders. And I remember the two of us speaking, at the Occupy movement. We had a very responsive crowd of people. People were interested. They were thoughtful, We had a good discussion about what ails the economy. And this was exactly what the founders have in mind for a peaceful redress of grievances. It was like a teaching. And then to have a matter of days later, have the police smash that encampment down on the grounds that, it was sloppy or crime or whatever. It was all garbage.
Right.
The fact is, that's what democracy is all about. And it was something that the people going to work in the state and federal and city buildings who have secure jobs, they weren't hurt by the recession. They were mostly Democrats, but they had no sympathy for people who didn't have guaranteed incomes.
But
didn't have civil service protection. And so they wanted them smashed, rounded up, thrown in jail, or what have you. It was abysmal.
What does it mean also, though, when we're living in a society where, it just seems that people have to prey on other people, or, they choose to, maybe, I don't know if they have to, it's just the way, like, the monetary system is set up with the whole mortgage, and just giving anybody a mortgage type
deal. Well, they
deal.
did it to steal money from people. These were the liars' loans. They knew they were lousy mortgages. They talked people into it. They were able to do it because it was unregulated, because they were going to put them in these collateralized debt obligations and package them as something really saleable. And by the way, it was done under, the deregulation, everything happened under a Democratic administration. And then the people who ran Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac were good old Democrats who were running those agencies and making tens of millions of dollars a year because those agencies were now being traded on Wall Street. So the corruption is very deep. And anybody has any illusions that the Democratic Party is somehow floating above all that and free of taint is garbage, And if I have any criticism at all of what's going on now is our whole focus for progressive politics is on the Democratic Party. And the Democratic Party is deserving of some very, very serious criticism. And what I'm concerned about is whether people will continue that criticism after the primaries. Because, you'll have the great lesser evil argument, and there'll be, particularly if it's somebody like Trump, they'll, oh, God, fascists are coming right through the door, and we got to back Hillary. And I think there's a real argument to be made that Hillary's going to bring about a terrible foreign policy and domestic economic policy, and people have got to raise some tough questions about that.
She was actually confronted and asked about Glass-Steagall and was completely ignored.
Yeah, I know. She said, yeah. And she now talks about the dark economy and the secret economy. Well, that's what her son-in-law was set up in with hedge funds by the head of Goldman Sachs, a company that was allowed to be saved because thanks to, reversal of Glass-Steagall, they were allowed to become a bank and get government funding during a critical moment. But nobody's asking the tough questions about, what the Clintons have done. And she said, let me end on this because the thing that really broke my spirit with Hillary Clinton was the statement, I want for every child in America what my grandchild has. Well, what does that mean? That your grandchild then your child has to have a father who gets money from the head of Goldman Sachs because he's grateful to the Clintons and sets up a hedge fund that your son could then help manage and you could make more money, or your daughter gets a job working for a big television outfit to produce anything. You really think that's going to be the parents' choice for most Americans? It's not going to happen. And so there's incredible cynicism at work here. And it's really quite offensive. But on that note, I got to go work for a living myself, teaching. So I'll see you the next time. But if you read my book, I'll come back and talk to you about it in great detail.
Thank you, Robert Scheer,
Okay.
Editor-in-Chief of Truthdig.
Thanks.
Have a great night.
Yeah.
And also his book, They Know Everything About You, How Data Collecting Corporations and Snooping Government Agencies Are Destroying Democracy. In the next half an hour, the remaining time of the first hour, I'm going to play part of Yanis Varoufakis, the former finance minister of Greece, who spoke here in New York City last night at the New School. And then at 7 is going to be Sander Hicks and Les Jameson on hr14.org and the ever-growing momentum of releasing the 28 pages.